Welcome to another edition of Campfire Stories. We are your hostesses, Devora and Cinder, here to make even your darkest nightmares come true. And while Devora was indeed dug up in time, she still has more of the neighborhood to terrorize. So tonight, gather with me by the fire as I tell you this interesting collection of scary but true stories. I work in a school that's over 100 years old. We nicknamed it the Franken School because every time they built an addition, it was like they slapped a brick box against a wall. The original school was in the center, and the additions enveloped around it. Some rooms are taller than others, some have curved walls, and some have windows that lead nowhere. Think the Winchester Mystery House, only in school form. My room was in the newest addition, which was built in 1976. It was a bright, large room that had a great airflow, which is important when it's June and you are stuck in a solid brick building that is just collecting heat. I'm with the littlest kids, the babies of the school, the ones on their own for the first time. Usually, they were a sweet bunch, a few nightmares here and there, but for the most part, great kids from a small community. The kids always joked that our room had a ghost, and they named her Ginny. She was a nice ghost, and whenever toys or crayons would go missing, they would always blame Ginny. When they played in the house area, Ginny was always their mom, and they would pretend to bake cookies for Ginny. They would set the table with an extra spot just for her, and one day a group came over to me and told me it was Ginny's birthday. I made a birthday crown for her, and we made a pretend cake out of Play-Doh and sang happy birthday. Ginny was loved by all the kids. After my first year in my room, I assumed that Ginny would be a thing of the past. The imaginary friend would become a fond kindergarten memory for my former students, that she was just something that group made up as a game. The next October, after a few weeks of getting to know my new group of little ones, they tell me about their new friend, Ginny. The cycle began again, and it never went away. Every year, the new kids tell me all about Ginny, and they adore this imaginary girl. I've come to accept that Ginny is just part of our room. So you might be wondering why I'm sharing this story here. It's just a cute kindergarten tale of an imaginary girl. Well, that's what I thought too, until today. Today our school celebrated its 125th anniversary. We had a huge open house and invited the community in. We had a barbecue, and the local museum came and shared archived photos. We gave an award to the oldest living alumni, 94 years old, and started at the school in 1928 when he was just 6. His name was Earl, and to be honest, he was more than half dead. He sat slumped in his chair, slept most of the time, and his family said he was lost in a sea of dementia. Staff members were asked to stay in our rooms and allow visitors to tour our rooms and ask questions. The day was going great, and we saw lots of old students. Some are even starting college. Oh my, how my babies have grown. The funny thing is that every former student asked about Ginny. I was surprised that they still remembered her. A small group of former students gathered in the house center, all different ages, and shared their favorite Ginny memories. It was a sweet moment. Later in the day, a woman in her early 60s came into my room. She walked around with amazement and awe. She told me that this used to be her room in the 80s. She loved working with the little kids so much, and even pointed out little features in the room, like the chunk missing from one of the cubbies. That was when a little boy brought a saw from home for show and tell, and he wanted to show his friends how it worked, so he sawed a chunk of wood out of the cubby. or the paint marks on my old worn-out desk were from when kids painted a bunch of boxes for the spring play. We shared a bunch of laughs, and then she looked at me with a twinkle in her eye. "Is Ginny still here?" she asked. I was floored. Surely she didn't mean the same imaginary girl. I smiled and told her that there was an imaginary girl that the kids loved to play with, and her name was Ginny. The woman giggled and told me that the exact same thing happened when she taught in this room. We shared a few Ginny moments, and she went to leave and said, "I don't know what Ginny is, but I'm glad that the kids have a deep love for her. I always felt like she was another student." I looked at her with a great fondness building up and said, "Me too." The crowds began to trickle down, and I was getting ready to close up my room and meet the rest of the staff outside for the barbecue when I heard a squeak. It was a wheelchair coming in my room, and it was Earl and his family. And I was a little confused on why he was in my room. It was built a lot later than when he had attended, and his family went to the school the next town over. I assumed he just wanted the full tour. I greeted the small group fondly as I began to pack up my desk. Earl appeared to wake up from his nap and had a huge smile on his face, and his eyes became very clear. His family was stunned because, for years, Earl had just been there, no real emotions, and in a fog. "Ginny," he said with a huge smile. "Ginny's here. I can feel her, and oh, how I've missed her. I can smell her hair. Lavender soap is all she ever used. She's happy here. She feels safe and loves playing with her friends." I was shocked at what he was saying, as was his family. They all swarmed around him in amazement. He was out of the fog, a rare occurrence. He looked me straight in the eyes, and they were clear as could be, and he said, "Ginny says thank you for taking care of her. She loves that you make her a birthday crown every year." A little tear rolled down my cheek. All I could muster up was a meek, "You're welcome." "I'm tired and cold. Who are you people? Why am I here? I want to leave." And with that, Earl was back in his fog. His family began to leave, and his granddaughter turned to me. Pops had a sister growing up named Ginny. She was a year younger, and they both went to this school. When Ginny was 6, she was playing on the monkey bars, which used to stand where this classroom is now. She fell off them and landed on her head. She was killed instantly. It crushed Pops to lose his beloved Ginny. When I was a kid and he would drive me around, he would always show me the school and where Ginny died. He was sad that they had built over the playground, but I'm not. In a weird way, I think it gave Ginny a home. I think Pops can move on now that Ginny is safe and cared for. I held back the tears and just nodded as she walked out the door. On Monday, I'm going to give Ginny her own cubby, maybe the one with the chip out of it. As long as I'm here, she'll always be one of my students. A few years ago, I was walking down the boardwalk of Venice Beach. I was interviewing for an internship in the area and decided to grab some dinner and go shopping. I did not have much growing up in life, and to this day am extremely sensitive to folks who are down on their luck and are mentally ill. I firmly believe that kindness can go a long way. As most Southern Californians know, there is a huge homeless population on the beach, complete with panhandlers as well as performers who hustle. After dinner, I was heading back to the hotel I stayed at and gave $10 to a man sitting in the shade with his head down. In my opinion, he certainly appeared homeless. A gray, shaggy beard, unkempt clothing, 2 large plastic bags beside him full of blankets, torn shoes, and sweaters. As soon as I dropped the money in his hat, he looked up at me, smiled a big, cheeky, toothless grin, and stated, "You have a heart of gold." I smiled shyly and wished him the best and walked on. Well, 10 minutes later, I arrived at my hotel, reached my room, and prepared for a shower. My room was on the first floor, just the way I liked it. I also must mention that due to being younger and without financial help, I was obligated to choose a seedy hotel of sorts. It was the kind with palm trees outlining the front, pink cemented walls, the more decorative type, if you will. The way the room is situated, you walk in, the kitchenette is directly to your left, the bedroom is straight down the room, and the bathroom is past the bed to the right. Typical and routine. I took the shower, put on my robe, and proceeded to go to bed, as my interview was the next day. That night, I woke up at 2:45 a.m. to contents in my closet shifting. I had placed a few hangers with clothes prior to my shower. At first I thought it was my imagination, but something made me get up to check. I can't pinpoint what it was, but I always trusted my gut. So I got out of bed, walked over to the closet, opened it, and before my eyes is the same homeless man I gave the money to. At this point, I am absolutely fucking terrified and screamed bloody murder. The crazed look in his eye, complete with that same toothless grin, is an image that haunts me to this day. "I wanted to thank you for having a heart of gold." I hauled ass the fuck out of that hotel room in my robe, ran to the front desk, and told the clerk to call the cops. All my valuables left behind, including my cell phone. Believe me, I knew I had to get the hell out of there before God knows what would have happened. The cops arrive on the scene 5 minutes later, and I was absolutely in shock as to what just happened. They proceed to case my room and the surrounding area for the homeless guy. But minutes later, they came back and stated there was no sign of him. What they did see, however, was a broken window with glass shattered both in and out of the room, as well as a hammer right outside. I heard nothing. I was in my shower after all. My assumption is that he followed me back to my room after I gave him money. Venice Beach is crowded at all hours of the day and night, and I was regrettably not vigilant. They never caught the guy, as he was most likely a roamer. I suffer from terrible anxiety and panic attacks because of what happened, but feel much better now. Please, everyone, I strongly urge you to all choose a safe and highly reputable hotel when staying the night somewhere. And check your closet, bathrooms, and hallways. Please look out your window and make sure there are no shady folks. This happened about a year ago. I was 22 and in my final year of college. I had been living in a loft apartment that was the third floor of a house. 2 other couples lived in the apartments below me. I lived just off campus in what's called a cusp neighborhood, which is basically a safer, just more family-orientated area, which was a mix of some college students as well as old people and families. Since my apartment was on the 3rd floor, the door I used was around back with 2 flights of stairs going up to my apartment door. Also, my bedroom was at the front of the house with 2 big windows that faced the street. One night, I was coming back from working on my thesis with a classmate at her apartment. It was late, around midnight, and I drove down my street to find parking. I live in a cul-de-sac with a dead end, so I turned around when I didn't see parking and decided to park on the main street that ran perpendicular to mine. I had done this many times before and walked to my apartment late at night on multiple occasions and always felt safe. After I got out of the car and pulled my 2 heavy bags out, I noticed a man standing in the street where mine began. He was about 40 feet away, and his face was sort of covered by shadow. But he was facing me, and I could tell he was staring at me. He seemed to be in his 30s, was wearing regular-looking clothes, and had a dog that looked to be a kind of beagle next to him. Normally I would just shrug it off as some guy walking his dog. No biggie. But I still had one of those really bad gut feelings something was up with this guy, and here's why. First of all, he pretty much seemed to appear out of nowhere. I had been driving down this street and didn't see anyone, nor did I see anyone up and down the street I parked on, and I was actively looking around to find a parking space, so I would have seen if someone was walking down the street. Second, he was just standing there facing me, and if he was walking his dog, shouldn't he be doing the obvious, like walking? Then the last thing, and this was the creepiest, was that he was standing in the middle of the street. Not by one of the sidewalks on either side, but smack dab in the middle, like he was trying to block the street. I fumbled for my keys to lock my car, and noticed him standing there, just staring. I knew I had to walk by him to get to my apartment, so I was starting to get pretty creeped out at this point. Not to mention his dog was just frozen as he was, not moving, and also staring at me. So I sort of half smiled in his direction and said, "Hello," pretty loudly, trying to show confidence that I wasn't scared of him. I started walking as far to the left of the street as I could, the side that my house was on, making sure my house key was all ready to go to unlock my door quickly. My house was 4 houses down from the top of the street, and there's a small street lamp right in front of my neighbor's house that kept it from being totally dark. The man hadn't said anything in return, and I was avoiding eye contact, trying to look straight ahead. But something possessed me to glance back at him, and I wished I hadn't. When I looked to my right, he was grinning at me, this really sinister-looking grin. The only thing moving was his head as he followed me. I snapped my head back and increased my speed, trying to mentally locate where my phone was in my bag, if I had to call 911. When I got to my house, I turned left to take the little path leading to where my door was, and quickly glanced back to see if he was following me. He was directly under my neighbor's street lamp, like a spotlight from about 15 feet from me, just standing there with his frozen dog still staring and smiling. At this point, I just bolted to the door. It was not a well lit by any means, and I couldn't see whether or not he was going to follow me to the door. I unlocked the door as fast as I could, slammed it behind me, and deadbolted it shut. I turned off the stair lights because I didn't want him to see me through the window at the second-floor landing and know what floor I lived on. I fumbled up the stairs to my apartment door, unlocked that, and turned off all the lights to my apartment. I crept into my bedroom. Thank God I had drawn the blinds before I left, and made a little hole in them with my fingers to look outside. Much to my horror, he was standing in the middle of the street again, directly in front of my house, looking up at my window, still smiling. And this time, he was waving. I freaked out and grabbed my phone from my bag and called my dad. Probably should have been the police in hindsight. I was in hysterics telling him what was happening. He told me to calm down, make sure all my doors and windows were locked, and to call the campus PD. So I called the campus police, and this time much more calmly explained my ordeal. By this time I felt safe enough to look out the window again, but I didn't see him. They eventually came after about a half an hour, took my statement, and searched for the guy, who they of course never found. They did say, however, that there were boot prints in the dirt by my back door, as well as the same prints in the side garden my neighbors who lived on the first floor kept. The garden was on the other side of the house, right under one of their windows. Needless to say, I made sure both of my first and second floor neighbors were warned about this creep. I think the thing that creeps me out the most is that I never saw him actually walk anywhere. It seemed like he just appeared. I never heard footsteps or any indication he had moved closer to me, and every time I saw him he was just standing there with his dog, who wasn't moving either. Not a sound from either of them. And that smile still gives me the shivers. So creepy, smiley guy with your frozen dog, let's never fucking meet again. Thank you for watching, friends. We hope you enjoyed this little visit with us. And if you did, please subscribe, like, and come back next time. And remember, there is nothing in the dark that wasn't there in the light. So enjoy.